Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is the author of 5 novels: True Grace, Reckonings, Tangled Lies, Getting It Right, and Justice for Emerson, the lattermost of which was released after this interview was recorded. Her name is Karen E. Osborne, and my interview with Karen will follow the note-taking sounds. Karen E. Osborne, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Aaron. I'm delighted to be here.
Prior to becoming an author, you were an academic administrator. What was your career as an academic administrator like?
So, I had 18 years in higher education. I was responsible for fundraising and alumni relations and all the other things that go along with this, marketing communications. And then for 25 plus years, I was the co-owner of the Osborne Group, Inc., which is an international consulting training firm, which our son now owns and runs.
You currently have 4 novels that have been released, and they're titled Getting It Right, Tangled Lies, Reckonings, and True Grace. Without spoiling too much of each of your first 4 novels, what are each of them about, and what genre are each of them in?
You were asking me that, Aaron. I love talking about all of my books. So Getting It Right is a siblings suspense novel about 2 half sisters. One is white and grew up in dysfunctional privilege, and the other is mixed race and grew up in foster care. And on the eve of the death of their shared father, they don't know each other, they've never met, and their father calls, he's the father of the white daughter, Alex. He calls Alex to his bedside in the hospital after a massive heart attack. And he says, I need you to find somebody for me. I have to make things right before I go. And so over 2 propulsive weeks in March, Alex searches for Kara, and lots of things ensue, lots of drama. And then the next one, Tangled Lies, is a murder mystery. It was my first murder mystery. And Vera, who is a 70-year-old Black woman, comes home in the very first chapter, on the very second page, and finds her adult son brutally murdered. 3 months later, she's in a car crash, and Danny, who is 25 and white and a hot mess, witnesses the crash, and she just thinks something's not right. And so the 2 women, over the course of 2 weeks in May, they come together to solve the murder. Of course, there's lots of bad guys and lots of intrigue, and I write short chapters, fast-paced books. And then the third one, Reckonings, that's my middle child. You know, sometimes middle children don't get all the love that older children and younger children get. And so Reckonings is a very fine story, but she doesn't get as much love. She's the story of Roxy, who is 36 years old, and she has 4 children, 2 rescue dogs, a husband. They live in a cramped apartment with 1 bathroom and only 2 bedrooms. And her oldest daughter is pregnant and won't tell her who the father is. Roxy is in a job she hates. Her husband, Carl, is in a job he hates. Both of them work for his father. And she thinks that she has a solution to just change their lives. She has written a play, and the local community theater is going to put it on in 9 days from the day that the book opens. And she just unrealistically, hey, people win the lottery. Somehow this is going to get to off-Broadway, and she's going to make enough money that they can get out of the apartment and they can quit their job. And at that same time, a man from her past comes back to town, and he had raped her 18 years before. And he thinks that her oldest daughter is his child. And she never told her husband and she never told her daughter. So just terrible things ensue. And this one takes place in two hot, steamy weeks in August. And then True Grace. So True Grace is my first historical novel, and it takes place in 1924. And Grace is a 27-year-old mom of five, and she and her husband and their children live in Harlem, New York, in a nice, very nice apartment. She's a homemaker. He has a good job. She has made peace with her marriage, but she comes home when the book opens to a devastating scene. And the story is about how this mixed-raced immigrant woman, she was born in the Congo, she was raised in England, she got married in Jamaica, and then found herself in New York, how she has to overcome this devastating happening and keep her family safe and keep her family alive. And it was inspired by my grandmother. So there's a lot of truth to the story, but it is fiction, not not real. And so those are my four novels that are out already.
As foster care and adoption are a major part of the story in getting it right, what are your thoughts about foster care and adoption, and how did they influence how you wrote Getting It Right?
So our daughter, Alicia, we adopted her when she was 2 years old. We had a son already that we made the natural way, and when she was two, we were her fourth home. We adopted her fourth home. On any given day in America, there are over 400,000 children in foster care. And every year, 62,000 age out, either at 18 or 21, depending what state you live in. And so that just touched my heart. It made me so sensitive when we saw four homes. She weighed next to nothing when we adopted her. Her hair looked almost gray from lack of nutrition. She is now a gorgeous 6 foot tall, very healthy woman. But this little girl, this little baby that we found. So I care a lot about how we define family. You could tell in the story where the two half sisters are mixed race and white, but are they family? And then in Reckonings, what constitutes family? So the theme of how do we have a broader kind of image of family, and how we have a broader image and understanding of race. And all my stories are multi generational as well, age. But anyway, that's how adoption and foster care became important to me and to my husband.
Forgiveness is a major part of the story in both Tangled Lies and Reckonings. What are your thoughts about forgiveness, and how did how you view forgiveness influence how you wrote both of those books?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Aaron. And my definition, my understanding of, my embracing of forgiveness has evolved over many years. I write about trauma, about sexual abuse and trauma, and I'm a survivor. I was a victim and then a survivor and now a thriver. And so forgiving was hard for me during my healing. I people would say that if you don't forgive, it just comes out sideways, and you're just carrying all of this hurt and sadness and anger around, and that forgiveness is not for the person that hurt you. Forgiveness is for you. And that took a while. That took a while for me to be able to forgive. So I write about forgiveness. A lot of my characters are in different places on that journey. and how do they come to the point where they are able to forgive? And then a lot of my characters need forgiveness themselves. And you have to start by forgiving yourself before others will forgive you. So I weave those themes into my stories based on my own journey.
How important was the setting and the time period in which it was set to how you wrote True Grace?
Mm. 1924, 100 years ago. And so many of the things that they were grappling with in 1924, we are grappling with today. So the reason I picked that year is because the terrible thing that happened to my grandmother, that's the year it happened to her. So I decided to use the actual year. But then as I did research, the amount of parallels, it was an anti-immigration time, and Grace was an immigrant. It was a time when women's rights, women were trying, they'd just gotten the vote, and there were privileged women, young privileged women who were flappers and, taking off their girdles and, you know, wearing, lifting their skirts so the skirts weren't no longer ankle length. But to women like Grace, who was a homemaker, uh, with 5 children, she didn't benefit from all of the wonderful freedom that some women were experiencing in 1924. There was also terrible police corruption in New York at the time where Grace lived. So there was a lot of resonant themes, things that were happening in that time and things that she had to overcome. And interesting, Erin, you asked me about adoption and foster care. The foster care system had only just started in the 20s, in the 1920s. The state had only just started, the states, that's the time of the orphan trains where they would scoop kids up off of the street that didn't have parents and put them on these trains and ship them out to the Midwest, to work on farms, and who knows what happened to them. Some of them, terrible things happened to them. So it was a nascent thing, foster care, and so I pull that into the True Grace story as well.
Your latest book, which will be released very soon, as a matter of fact, is titled Justice for Emerson. Without spoiling too much about that book, what will it be about?
So I decided I was tired of trauma. I have to tell you, Aaron, I was tired of writing about trauma. So I decided to do another murder. Have another murder mystery. So this one is a dual timeline murder mystery. It takes place in present day, where Aria she's 50 years old and she's a widow, and she is the CEO of a not-for-profit, which does a lot of the things that I care deeply about. And she helps the unhoused, the hungry, people that just need a hand up. And the opening scenes of the book, we meet Aria. She's 5'2", and she wears 3-inch heels, and she has a little chip on her shoulder about being short. She doesn't like people thinking that she doesn't, that she isn't smart or powerful because of her height. And in the opening pages of the book, she discovers a beloved volunteer, Hal Emerson, murdered in the basement of the not-for-profit, and the murderer sees her. And so over 2 weeks, we're back in March again, 2 weeks in March, she and 2 possible love interests, one a former boyfriend who's a police officer, a detective, and one a wealthy donor and volunteer to the not-for-profit. The 3 of them are working on to solve the murder. And we meet Cal Emerson, the dual timeline part, back in 1968. And he's on his way to Vietnam on the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated. And so the story is kind of how Arya and Jax and Glover, the detective, how they are trying to find out who murdered Cal Emerson, while we meet Emerson as a young man and we follow his life to the point where he turned his life around, but now finds himself murdered. And how did what happened to him in the past lead to the murder today? So it was very fun. It was fun researching Vietnam and Bangkok, places that he visited, and having a better understanding of addiction and um, so many of the trauma that I know I said no more trauma, but Emerson does have he does have trauma and no more women's trauma, I guess. So anyway, it's a fast-paced murder mystery, dual timeline, multiracial, wonderful book. I say modestly.
Which of your books was the easiest and which of your books was the most difficult for you to write?
Hmm. So getting it right was hard because it was my first book and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And I needed to learn my craft and I needed to get better at my craft. That one took the longest, starts and stops and starts and stops because I never done anything like that before. I was 69 years old when it came out. This had been a lifelong dream that I would become an author. And I wrote Getting It Right on airplanes because I was still working. I was the president of our consulting firm and traveling the world. And so I wrote Getting It Right on airplanes and in the Delta Lounge and in hotel rooms. And I had to fit it in and squeeze it in while I was working I was on the road 4 days a week, every week. I was in a hotel room on an airplane. So that was the hardest. And also, I was writing about trauma that I had experienced. So it was also painful. But I ended up having a lot of fun writing it and developing the characters and all that. But that just took forever. So that was the hardest one to write. Justice for Emerson was probably the easiest one. I've been at it now for, since I was 19, no, 2017, the first one came out, and here we are, 2025. So I've gotten to be a better writer with each book, and I knew how to research better because of True Grace, and so I think Justice for Emerson was the easiest to write.
Are all your books independently, traditionally, or hybrid published, or did you use different publishing methods for each of your books?
So all of them are traditionally published, two different publishers, small presses. So the first one was I got an agent, and she got me a contract with Akashic Books out of New York. And thank you, Akashic Books. And that was a great start. And then trying to get Tangled Lies published, that took a lot of rejection. Oh my gosh. And which, is hard. I mean, it's hard for authors when you're just putting yourself out there. But my son, who's an author as well, he encouraged me. He said, Mom, it's a great book. You just have to pull up your big girl pants and you just have to keep going. So I set a goal of 100 rejections. I wouldn't quit until I got 100 rejections. I was writing agents and small presses. And Black Rose Writing, which is a small press out of Texas, they offered me my second contract. And I've been with them ever since.
Now, you're also a public speaker. What types of venues do you give speeches in, and what topics do you typically speak about?
So I help not-for-profits, and I speak about building strong boards, management, um, fundraising, skills, marketing, communications, the things that I spent my previous career, 40 plus years doing. And in my own little tiny, tiny world, I'm well known. So people have invited me to Australia and Singapore and South Africa and all over Europe and all over the United States and Canada and Mexico to speak and give people how to with humor and inspiration. I try and mix those three together. And all of my talks are very interactive. I engage my audience all the time. I don't, talk for 45 minutes and then say, do you have any questions? I ask questions all along. I have them do things. So it's been a wonderful career. And it's helped me with my podcast because I have a podcast. What are you reading? What are you writing? It's a weekly video podcast. And it's it was natural for me to interview people because that was part of my persona. And not all writers are, bubbly, chatty people. So it is, I'm good at pulling people out and helping them really talk about their books in a positive way, as you do.
You mentioned you have your own YouTube channel and you have a video podcast on there. Is your YouTube channel home to just your video podcast, or do you upload other types of videos as well?
It has two kind of channels, internal channels. So one is all about my previous life, and the other is all of the podcasts that I do. So both. So if somebody's interested in philanthropy, they can find all of my videos on philanthropy. And if somebody is interested in reading and writing, then they can find all my videos from what are you reading? What are you writing? So it has both.
Karen, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing guest, and I hope to be able to interview your son at some point in the future.
Oh, I would love that. He writes short stories and he gets like, he's a literary writer. I'm a genre writer and he's a literary writer. So I think you would enjoy him. He's been published in some really fine magazines. He's a cool guy.
Karen was an absolutely amazing guest to interview, and I hope to read her book soon. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2025, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.